Good morning to everyone. Welcome to Literary Critics and Approaches. Today, let's discuss about the literary critic Plato. So here we are going to listen about Plato's age and works. Plato was born in Athens, generally at 427 BC, in an aristocratic family and died in 348 BC. He was the most celebrated disciple of Socrates. He was a Greek philosopher who laid the foundation of Western philosophy. He left his political ambitions and devoted his time to philosophy. Socrates was hanged on the charge of impiety in 399 BC, and after his death, Plato founded an academy. While the previous age was one of a creative activity, the 4th century BC was an age of critical inquiry and analysis. Plato was not a professed critic of literature, but he had an interest in philosophical investigation. His most famous work is The Republic, which explains about a wise society run by a philosopher. He is also famous for his dialogues, which shows his metaphysical theory of forms. His notable works are Apology, Phaedo, Symposium, The Republic, and Timaeus. Next, about Plato's view of art. Literature is an art, but in Plato's view, art deals with imitation of imitation. In the Republic, he says, ideas are the ultimate reality. According to him, the ideal or perfect reality lies elsewhere. What we see in an imitation of ideal reality, and that imitation is not perfect, so that he is mentioning it's twice removed from reality. When we go through his theory of reality, there he notes that art is nothing but illusion. An artist deals with what is not real. Thus, he is saying art is a copy of the world of senses, so that it must be twice removed from the truth. The next part is how he attacked poetry. Plato is famous for having banished poetry and poets from the Republic because they produced the wrong sort of poetry. He attacked poetry on three basic grounds, that is, education, philosophy, and moral point of view. Plato believed that poetry is a form of memes. Apart from these, there are three other grounds of condemnation. Here, the first one is poetic inspiration. He says the poet writes a poem not because he thought for a long time, but a sudden inspiration. The muse suddenly fills him and makes him sing. This suddenness may not be truthful. In his view, all poetical imitations are ruinous to the understanding of the hearers, and that the knowledge of the true nature is the only antidote to them. Then the imitative poet who aims at being popular is not by nature made, nor is his art intended to please or to affect the rational principle in the soul, but he will prefer the passionate and fitful temper which is easily imitated. No doubt in the poet's utterance there is a profound truth, but it fails in the test of reason. Therefore, he considered philosophy to be better than poetry. That is, poetry can't take the place of philosophy because philosophy deals with the questions of truth. Then the second one is the emotional appeal of poetry. Here, the next charge against poetry is its appeal to the emotions. Poetry affects the emotions and not the reason. It appeals to the heart and not to the intellect. Emotions takes us away from reason, and anything that is devoid of rationality takes away from the ultimate truth. Emotions are temporary and they are not safeguards as reason to men. So Plato says that poetry must be fed and watered the passions instead of drying them up, and let them rule instead of ruling them, as they ought to be ruled, with a view to the happiness and virtue of mankind. Then the next one is its non moral character. Here, Plato indicates the lack of morality in poetry. That is, poetry is non moral in character. It treats both virtue and vice alike. In the Republic, Plato has quoted that many evil livers are happy and many righteous men are unhappy. It doesn't teach moral values that corrupts both the citizen and the state. Let us see about the functions of poetry. Here he is giving some points. Poetry is not just an offer to pleasure. He says, although it pleases mere pleasure, it cannot be its object. Then poetry should teach moral, that is, moral values must be included. He suggests truth as the test of poetry and what contribution it makes to the knowledge of virtue. In the poet's view, pleasure is of the highest kind, but Plato says poetic truth must be the highest truth with ideal forms of justice, goodness, beauty, etc. Then the comments of drama. According to Plato, drama is a branch of poetry. When compared to poetry, the representations of drama are as much removed from reality, as much a product of inspiration, as much emotional in appeal, and as much unconcerned with morality. Also, there are some more aspects in the dramatic art. Let's see what are the things Plato points. The first difference is its appeal to baser instincts. Drama is to be staged, it is not like poetry. Its approval and disapproval depends upon the audience. To please the audience, the dramatist use the techniques as quarrels or lamentations in tragedy and imitation of thunder or cries of beast in comedy. These techniques are a shame of the normal life, which leads to bad taste and lack of care in discipline. So plan to see such plays must be censored. Then the second difference is the effects of impersonation. Plato describes that sometimes drama reacts unfavorably on the actors themselves. While the audience were watching the characters such as cowards, knaves, or criminals, the evil qualities of those characters enter into the audience unknowing to them. They tend to become one of these characters. They lose their individuality and leads to the enfeeblement of character. So such characters must not be in a play and have good characters with the cream of humanity, courage, wisdom, virtue, etc. Then the last one is tragic and comic pleasure. Plato is against the pleasure a tragedy and a comedy gives. Human nature is a mixture of heterogeneous feelings such as anger, envy, fear, grief, and so on. In tragedy, when they are indulged in excess, there is pleasure. It pleases a man to lose his temper. In comedy, the pleasure comes out in the form of laughter when a coward acts like a brave man, or a fool as a wise man, or a cheat as an honest man. Such laughable pleasure is malicious. Those characters are not to be laughed at, but they should be pitied. Plato hits upon the truth that a comic character must be lovable. Then the observations on style. Plato lived in the age of oratory, and so he gave rules for the spoken language which could also be applied for the written word. He says for a good speech, first of all, the speaker must have a thorough knowledge of the subject Next, he must know the art of speaking, and then his thoughts upon his subject must follow each other in a natural sequence. Such a speech will impress the hearers, that is, he can communicate himself best to his hearers. Finally, he must have a knowledge of human psychology to get into the hearer's heart and soul. So, in Plato's criticism, we see the very nature of poetry, which is a divine release of the soul from the yoke of custom and convention. And the difference between the function of poetry and philosophy, that is, poetry aims at delight and philosophy at instruction. Then the tragic and comic pleasure, and finally, about the principles of a good speech. Thank you.